Hello gamers, my name is Duma and welcome to the Game Room. Here on the channel we have the Next Level series, which are builds for players who are ready to take on more than one bar, but not quite yet a full 2 bars. More of a 1.5 bar kind of thing, but with very specific rotations to make it easy to learn to bar swap while DPSing. The main benefit of these builds typically is to do very high damage for how little abilities they require for you to use, and this one today is by miles the king of the pack of this series right now. This build today only uses one single back bar ability and parses over 133,000 DPS, which is a setup that is not just a dummy parsing build, but is an actual viable build for content. I have legitimately never seen this much damage with this simple of a rotation and kit, but I'll let you see it and be the judge for yourself. There are also some very new things on the build that came with update 41 I'm kind of excited about. I'm going to go over this for you quick and then show you the build in action with a parse clip. If you need a written guide, it's up for you over at thegameroom.tv, along with lots of other great ESO builds and guides. Okay, let's take a look. For this build, we have all 64 points in stamina and using the Thief Mundus. For consumables, we're using Lavafoot Soup, and if you need a bit more health, you can use Artaeum Takeaway Broth. For our gear, first let's get the big one out of the way, and that's Reliquin. Hold on, I know right now some of you are like, nope, I'm out because it's a trial set, but let me encourage you for 1 second and maybe offer a different perspective than what you may already have. As you sit there, arms folded, scowling at your screen, I get it. The trial of Cloud Rest that Reliquin comes from is one that is constantly pugged by groups. There are always groups just looking for bodies to throw damage downrange. Just think of it like a big 12-man dungeon regarding difficulty. It's honestly not bad at all, even for a very inexperienced player. Yeah, you may die a few times, you may die a lot, but who cares? That's how learning it works, and I promise you, nobody really cares. Everyone knows what time it is with the gear farm pugs. Give it a shot sometime. You may surprise yourself with how easy and quick it was to clear the trial on normal with most pugs, and you'll get access to one of the best sets in the game for single target DPS, even if you do it on normal. Speaking of normal, veteran is not a barrier for entry for this build or its DPS. You can use normal Reliquin and a normal arena weapon, which we'll talk about here in a second. So that means no veteran content at all other than your monster set, and still parse over 130k DPS. So no veteran trials and no veteran arenas required. I parsed a lot for this build. I tried everything. There probably isn't a single front and back bar combination of relevant skills I didn't try. I tried all kinds of weird combinations with weird rotations, and this is what I found. Get yourself a solid centerpiece trial set like Reliquin or Coral, and then quite literally anything works, within reason. I paired this with everything. Crafted sets, dungeon sets, other trial sets, crit sets, stat sets, proc sets. If it's in the conversation, I tried it. And here's the result. Reli or Coral plus anything works. That's it, done. To demonstrate this for you, here is a normal Reliquin plus a normal Maelstrom weapon plus the crafted set of Hundings. If you don't know what Hundings is, Hundings and Julianos is like the new player sets. It's one of the first real sets you can craft and is on pretty much any good new player quote unquote first build. And even with this set, it's still at just under 125,000 DPS. If this is at 125k, then anything else is basically an improvement. Working our way upwards a bit to show you a few examples, here is Leviathan, a 1,000-year-old dungeon crit set that most people never even heard of at 128k DPS. The People's Champ of Pillared Nirn at 130k DPS, and what the second best option is, which is another trial set of Yokita at just under 134k DPS. Yokita is another set that is very, very easy to pug from a trial I encourage you to try even if you haven't. You shouldn't have any problems picking up this set as well. If you know you aren't going to do any trials and you didn't mad click off the video at Reliquin, I got you covered as well. I did some non-trial parses for you players also, and this is what I found for you to make it simple for now. Just treat Pillar of Nirn like Reliquin in the previous example, meaning use Pillar of Nirn as your centerpiece, and then just pair that with whatever DPS set you have access to or like. For example, here's Pillar of Nirn and Leviathan again, parsing right at 120k, which is absolutely bananas if you think about it, with no trial sets and still only using one back bar button. So you're going to be rock solid as well, even if you just know for sure you'll never touch a trial. I'll show you the armor config with the 2 best sets, but the stats and weights will still apply to whatever sets you end up using. We have 6 medium and 1 light piece, which will come from our monster set, which is Maw of the Infernal. Maw is performing very strong on this setup right now. I've had it 2 to 4k higher than Zon's at times with good RNG. All of our armor traits are divines with max stamina and chance. All bloodthirsty traits on the jewelry with physical physical harm enchants, and then something new for our weapons here. So I played around with the new status effects quite a bit, specifically shock and concussion, trying to find ways to juice them in our damage. Kind of wild here, double charged for our daggers parsed higher than Nern on the main hand, and it wasn't really close here. That's a 6k difference just from a weapon trait. Even if you say the other parse was good and this was bad, even considering that, 6k is kind of a lot here. Something very different on the back bar as well. I tried some weird stuff like triple shock enchants and just everything I could to get more reasonable shock damage out, and charged on the back bar even with only having one button back there. So very minimal applications of the damage, still slightly outparsed weapon damage here. As you get better and add more abilities to the back bar and increase that bar swap frequency in your rotations, charge becomes even stronger to a degree as an option. Really wild stuff here with status effects. So to summarize that with weapons, that is double charged traits on the daggers, and we are still using poison and flame enchants, and then infused Maelstrom Greatsword with the shock enchant. The infused trait isn't going to change yet. It's still going to be one of your best options for the back bar, so you don't need to retrait your VMA weapons here. For CP in the blue tree, we have our 3 main slottables of Deadly Aim, Mastered Arms, and Fighting Finesse. And then if you are parsing or have a good source of off balance in your group, Exploiter. Otherwise, there are lots of options depending on what you're doing. One solid, well-rounded option you can choose is Wrathful Strikes. Red tree is kind of the usual stuff here, more health, survivability, and more sustain. You can drop any of these for celerity as you see fit if you need more movement speed. For our skills, this is where things get a little weird. It ended up in a very strange place rotation-wise, but it just works. My main goal was to find where the intersection of the highest damage output and the least amount of work came together. And dudes, I think we're there. I think this is it, or it's right there along with other versions of this, maybe with some tiny tweaks. Here we're double barring the pets of Volatile Familiar and Twilight Tormentor. Standard stuff there. Familiar you will keep active during the parse like a normal ability, but with the Tormentor, we only use it one single time before we begin combat and then never use it again. Next, we have Barb Trap for more damage, our Minor Force buff, and more weapon damage from the Fighters Guild passive Slayer to the bulk of our damage while on the front bar. Next, we have Daedric Prey, a usual stuff here as well. This will be at the center of our rotation, and it buffs the damage of our pets by 45% and does additional damage on its own. Next, we have the Charged Atronach making its way onto the scene with its guaranteed concussion damage with the new changes to status effects and update 41. On the back bar, we have our 2 pets again, and then Stampede, which is the only ability we actually use back here. The Maelstrom Sword excels on a class and build like this that is using a ton of direct damage, especially when coupled with something like Rapid Strikes that hits 4 times, of which each instance is juiced by your Maelstrom Sword, not to mention the AoE DPS and mobility Stampede provides. Next is a defensive flex spot of your choice, just any heal you prefer, as having one defensive ability is usually a good idea. Next, we're doing something a little sneaky with Bound Armaments. We are slotting it on the back bar for its 8% stamina increase that it gives to the front bar, juicing the majority of your damage. We aren't actually using it, ever. We just ignore the stacks. It's a back bar passive ability for our front bar, while not using its procs. Kind of weird, especially when it's typically a source of major DPS on the front bar when using its proc properly. My original version of this build I was going to post was using this on the back bar after Stampede. So after every Stampede, you would use Armaments, then bar swap back to the front bar. This added about 2 to 4k DPS or so. Not too bad of an increase considering how it was being used. I decided randomly to just parse without using it, and it parsed the same. I didn't understand it really and pick things apart in the logs, and what I found was, because most of the time, immediately after you bar swap from your Stampede, you'll be using Rapid Strikes in that next global. When you compare one global of Rapid Strikes to one global of Armaments, they are fairly close at roughly 13 and 16k unmodified damage on this build, leaning in favor of Armaments. So with just a little crit RNG, you can easily end up with more DPS not using Armaments in that global. Alternatively, the other global it landed on after a Stampede refresh was the Expiration of Prey, which takes priority to refresh over using an Armaments proc. So you would have to double bar swap, making it even worse. Then you have your dual wield passive benefit of more execute damage with Rapids, making it even more messy, drawing a line in the parse to change rotations a bit, which is the opposite intent of the build. So I just pulled it out of the rotation entirely and it worked fantastic. fantastic. PTS parsing can be a little tricky, and this past week on EU has been a little funky, which is where I suspect some of this is coming from, as using armaments should be a little further ahead than it was. But either way, the takeaway here is with only using one button, you are still well over 130k DPS, which is just honestly ridiculous. Next, we have power overload for maximum parse DPS. If you aren't concerned about that, then you can use whatever you like back here. It won't matter much. Regarding the rotation, I put a lot of time into this for you, probably the most time of this. Nothing matters in a build like this if you put together an amazing setup and then torpedo it with a silly convoluted rotation. There are several ways to begin your parse here. I'm going to show you not necessarily the most effective, but again, where that highest output for easiest input intersection is, that you can also apply in live content. So you can practice on the dummy exactly what you'll be doing in dungeons and trials. I do want to add one tiny caveat to that though. When parsing, just to make the opener super clean and get the tiniest little bit of extra damage, we're going to drop our back bar defensive flex spot ability and double bar trap here. You don't have to at all. It just makes the opener a tiny bit cleaner while parsing. We pre-buff before combat with activating power overload, potion, and then both pets. Then immediately stampede in, drop trap, bar swap, pray, then spam rapid strikes. From here, you're locked in until the end of the parse. Your rotation is pray followed by 5 rapid strikes. For the whole rotation, you never break. Pray followed by 5 globals. Other than general parsing habits, keeping that element super tight and clean is the trick to high DPS here. As familiar and trap expire, refresh them from the front bar in place of rapids, and likewise bar swap, stampede, and bar swap back to refresh stampede as needed in place of a rapids. The only other element is at the beginning when your ultimate is just above 200, use your front bar Atro ultimate. Don't wait for it to hit 180. Do it the global before if you can. You'll miss some ulti uses with that final light attack as your ulti dips below 180. Before there, you should get 2 more uses of the Atro before the parse is done if you're moving quick. A little parsing aid for you here if Stampede is causing you issues to bar swap off of is to make a little angled trap like this and auto run into it while parsing. Alternatively, you can just use armaments after Stampede and not have to do this at all. Just have a tiny change in your rotation. Boom! It's that easy, gamers. It's legitimately that simple. A couple of buttons on the front bar, one on the back, and we are at 133k DPS. What a time to be alive. I'll leave you with the parse clip so you can see it in action. Hey, look, I'm out of here. I appreciate y'all for watching. I hope this provides value in your time in ESO, and have a wonderful day.